Welcome to the channel. This is Technoscope.
Welcome back, scopers. I want you to scope this out. On the last episode, I built a PC for my son who turned 8 years old, and he absolutely loved it. But if you think what you saw in the last episode was all there was to it, I have a nice surprise for you. In this video, I will show you what steps I took to install the LEDs, along with a cold boot from the computer at the end. Now at this point, we pick up in the video, I've already installed the top LEDs. I've even run the wire to the back of the computer and down to the power supply for it to be installed. But I'm also going to install LEDs on the bottom, and that's where this video picks up. Now the wire that I used for this install is definitely overkill. This is 14 gauge in-wall speaker wire that I bought from Home Depot. And these are the LEDs I'm using for the installation. And if you'd like to use the same LEDs, I've placed the link in the description below. If you look carefully at the strand, you'll notice that there are markings that show where you can carefully cut the strand of LEDs. And if you look at this part right here, you'll notice that I've already cut it and stripped back the protective coating so that I can attach wires. And if you look at this segment, you'll notice that it's designed to be cut every 3 LEDs. So the next thing you're going to need to do is to measure for an exact measurement and find where you need to cut the LED strand. So now that I've located that point, I'm going to take a pair of sharp scissors and cut the strand right there. So at this point, you're going to take your soldering iron, or in my case, soldering gun, and solder 2 wires to the end of the LED strand. Now this is definitely a job for a soldering iron versus a soldering gun. The tip on a soldering gun is very blunt, whereas the tip on a soldering iron can be as fine as the best tip that you can find. And in this particular case, the LEDs are very small and the contacts are close together. So soldering wire into those pads is a tricky proposition when you're using something as big and as powerful as a soldering gun. So you're thinking, why didn't I use a soldering iron instead of a soldering gun? I was just being lazy. That's all it was. Now I decided to put some solder on the pads for the LED strip, but if you tin your wires properly, this step is really unnecessary. The next thing to do is to remove the sheathing from the speaker wire so we can get to the individual wires on the inside. The method I use for doing this is usually take something sharp and score around the outside edges, just barely cutting into the material. That way it makes it easy for you to actually just tear it off the end. And if you have something like a utility knife, you can run around the edges of it, but whatever you do, just do not cut through the actual wire. I'll be using heat shrink here to cover the solder connection between the LEDs and the wire. Again, making this solder connection would probably be easier with a soldering iron than a soldering gun. But like I said, I was being lazy, and it's a lot easier to just pull out the soldering gun than set up the soldering iron. I actually had to go back at this point and touch up the solder connections. The blunt tip of the soldering gun actually left too much solder, and the connections were actually close enough to cause a short. So after applying heat to the shrink tubing, here's the final product. Now ideally you would have none of the wires exposed, but in this particular case it's not going to show and there's no chance of water getting in, and the shrink tubing is covering the solder connection, so there's no chance of shorting to the case. So before I finish making my connections, I want to go ahead and run the wire and install the LEDs to make sure that the wire that I'm going to run and install is the proper length. To help with this project, I picked up a Y splitter from Molex connectors. Now I want full power 12 volts, so on this connection I'm going to be using the yellow wires for positive and the black for negative. If you wanted to use a 5 volt, which would produce a little less than half, you would use the red and the black wires. And because I have 2 wire connections, one for the top LED strip and one for the bottom LED strip, that's why I'm using a wire adapter for this project. As you can see from the end of the Molex connector, there are 4 pins. 2 are for the yellow and black wires that I need, and the other 2 are for the red and black wires that I don't need. But before I do anything about the pins, the first thing I need to do is cut the wire to the length that I need and cut off the Y connectors that I don't need. And here we are with the connector, sans the red and black connections that I didn't need. So here are the wires we're going to need, stripped and ready to go. Now I use rosin core solder, so this step is completely unnecessary, but I'd rather have extra clean wires than have any problems soldering to them. The first thing you want to do with the Y adapter is tin the wires. In other words, heat the wires up and apply solder. There's probably nothing more frustrating than admiring your own soldering work and then suddenly realizing you forgot to put on the heat shrink. Don't forget to do this critical step. LEDs are not merely light bulbs, so polarity does matter. In this particular case, the yellow is the positive 12 volts, so it will go to the red wire, and of course the black wires are the negative. Now, if you plan far enough ahead, you can actually do this part with shrink tubing. Unfortunately, I did not, so I'm going to use electrical tape. And here is our finished product. 2 LED strips, 1 Molex connection. Now all we have to do is connect it to power and turn the machine on. The beautiful thing about this Fantex case is despite the non-modular power supply and the wires running from the LED strips, the panel on this case hides all that mess, so there's no ugly bundle of wires to look at. And here's the bottom LED strip. As you can see, it's simple and hidden from view, and even with me pointing the camera at it, it's hard to even see it. So here we are at the moment you've been waiting for. Let's go ahead and turn this on and show you what it looks like. So I hope you enjoyed this video, but before you go, there's one last thing. I've gotten requests to show this computer booting. So here it is. I hope you liked this video. Hit the thumbs up if you liked it, hit the thumbs down if you disliked it. Don't forget to subscribe and come back and scope out more videos like these. My name is Elemental and this is Technoscope.
Technoscope is a Twisted Curve production.